Hello everyone and welcome to part 2 of this project. I'll link part 1 above and below in case you missed it. We left off having completed the underdress for the tea gown. Typically these are attached to the overgown, but due to the neckline changes I decided to make them separate. A quick recap of the project. Based on some illustrations on Instagram, a few of us got together to make 1890s inspired Frozen costumes. I picked Elsa's nightgown, which didn't have a design already, so I made one. Excuse my crude drawing. I based this on lots of extents and in particular this 1894 pattern by Ageless Patterns, which is taken from a period pattern. Here's my main fabric, a lovely berry fuchsia crepe back satin. I really needed these fabrics to be affordable and I had to purchase them all online, so they were a bit hit or miss. But I feel like this colour was spot on, though it's hard to capture on camera. I have a few thoughts about this pattern. I did make a mock-up, particularly because I thought it would need taking in. The pattern is taken exactly from the original, so there are no alternative sizes. So the original, it was a 46 bust and 40-inch waist. Now these measurements are vastly different from mine, especially with period accurate undergarments. Yet I didn't have to take it in at all. I'm still confused about this. So anyway, I just cut the pattern exactly as it was and decided I could make adjustments further on if needed. Although the crepe back satin was lovely, I felt the overgown needed a little more structure, so I decided to interline it with tarlatan, since it was what I had at hand. The overgown is made of 2 pattern pieces alone, a front section which extends to the side and is fitted at the front with a very long dart, and the back section which is cut on the fold, has one fitting dart and has enough room for the Watteau-like pleats at the back. With my pieces cut out, I then hand basted the 2 layers together. Does anyone else have an overlocker that hates them? I finally got it to work and overlocked all my pieces. I was in a time crunch and since my fabrics weren't too accurate anyway, I decided to finish the seams by overlocking them, which saved me a lot of time. Once it was working, of course. This pattern does come with instructions, kind of. There is one paragraph with vague directions. The first step is to sew up the darts in all the pieces. I didn't film a lot of the construction because the making of this was so hectic. I kept jumping between steps rather than doing it systematically like I usually do. At this point, I moved on to the sleeves. Essentially, I had to build the shell of the overground out of the satin to then add the overlayer, and this included the sleeves. I wanted to keep Elsa's slim sleeves but combine them with the 1890s over the top sleeves, so I did a fitted lining sleeve in the crepe back satin. This is a simple 2-part sleeve, the same I used for my 1890s jacket. The side seams are sewn together. And here is the overlayer. I agonized over this fabric choice for weeks and must have gotten 20 samples in the post, but eventually set it on this glitter tulle. A very inaccurate fabric, but oh well. I really wanted to keep the overlay of the original dress, and in the Into the Unknown sequence, it glitters wonderfully. I'm not a very glitter person, so this was way out of my comfort zone. I used the satin pieces to cut out the overlayer so that it would be fitted without having to do darts. I cut it to be slightly larger so that it would stand apart from the satin when hanging. I also cut the overlayer for the sleeves, which was massive, true 1890s style. I worked on the sleeves first. The instructions tell you to turn up the lower edge, making a fold, and then shirr across the elbow. I sewed 3 rows of gathering stitches by machine, and then pulled them up to gather it roughly to my elbow measurement. I then sewed the gathering rows at the top of the sleeve and gathered it to fit the sleeve lining. The overgown construction went a little bit like this. I sewed up the side seams of the overgown and the tulle overlayers separately. I then pinned the overlayer onto the overgown across the neckline and shoulders, then sewed up the shoulder seam. I then set the neckline by turning the raw edge under twice and then doing the same to the tulle layer and hand sewing it all down. I also made up the pleats in the back. This means that the overlayer is only secured at the shoulder seams and then by hand across the neckline. I then hemmed the centre front of the tulle overlayer, but only sewed it to the satin from the neckline to the waist. I wanted the rest to flow free. I did this all by hand. To set the pleats, I hand stitched them in place with a small back stitch. The next step was to hem the overgown. I used horsehair tape to give it a little more body. This is sewn to the bottom edge of the right side of the fabric, then flipped inwards and ironed, and then stitched by hand with a herringbone stitch. I really hated to see the tarlatan every time the gown moved, so I used my last scraps of the satin and cut as much of a facing as I could. It's not a full facing, but I managed to cut out 2 full front bits and half of the back. Some bits had to be pieced together and pinned in place. The main construction was done. I also set in the sleeves at some point along this journey, I think I must have. But time to move on to the decorations. I made a pleated belt out of a rectangular of purple velvet. The belt actually has 2 edges, which attach to the inside back of the overgown. I also made some little velvet bows for the sleeves. For the triangular trim around the neckline, I initially folded, ironed and sewed the ribbon as shown. However, I decided the triangles were too far apart. Instead, I pinned 2 lengths of ribbon together and drew on the triangles. I sewed this up by machine and then used frayed check along the sewn line. I cut out the triangles, turned it the right side out and pressed. This was sandwiched between the facings and the gown, and then everything was hand stitched in place. The last step was to add the crystals to the neckline with some gem tack, and it was done! Overall, this was a really fun project and I loved joining together historically inspired and cosplay. I hope I get to wear this somewhere soon. Thank you for watching and check out the description for more historically inspired Frozen costumes.